History and legal studies. I see a huge comparison between history and the law. I think that both of them are the studies of not just civilization, but human conduct and human interactions and human relationships. When you study history, you're talking about the way that people acted in regard to their society and political situations and the like. And of course, the law is quite similar to that. Right. And history is a wonderful training to go on and go to law school and become a lawyer.
Now, if you were to take today and look in history, what are some of the things that stand out for you?
Well, of course, I'm a big fan of the constitutional history of the United States.
Okay.
I teach constitutional law at the Massachusetts School of Law. It's a required course that all law students take. So I'm very interested in our founding fathers and the creation of the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention, and of course our Bill of Rights that was adopted 2 years after the Constitution was ratified. So I'm hugely interested in that. Right. I also have followed over the years the divisions that led to the Civil War, all of which were around right from the start of the Republic, right up through the Civil War. So those are big issues, and many of the problems that came from them linger today.
Yes, right. As a matter of fact, we were talking about the First and Second Amendments. They must be a big issue to you nowadays.
Of course.
And of course, there's a lot of history in it, and everybody's going back into history to say, prove their point. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So let's talk about the Second Amendment, okay. The right to bear arms, so-called. Right. There are two Supreme Court cases. I'll just call them. The first was the Hellar case, and the second was the McDonald case. If you read both of those cases, both of those Supreme Court cases, there's as much history in those cases as there is law, because one of the things that the Supreme Court justices argued with each other about is what was the history, what was the purpose of the Second Amendment. And of course, it was a closely divided court, so different people have different opinions on it. Right. And the majority said that there's an individual right to carry arms, whereas the minority said that, well, it's really the right of the militia to exist and to bear arms.
What do you say about some of the things they're talking about, how George Washington and some of our founding fathers have made statements on how important it is to have that Second Amendment right?
Yeah. As a lawyer and as a historian, I know that we can go back and always find statements that our famous historical figures made that support us. Right. And we can find statements from each side of it that support us. And so we're hearing an awful lot of those. Right. We clearly have a defined history with guns as Americans. I'd say certainly we have this notion of the militia that comes straight out of the Second Amendment. The idea that we beat the British using a militia. Yeah, right. And the Founding Fathers were strongly opposed to standing armies, the so-called standing army. They saw the standing army as being evil. So they essentially thought if we had a militia, we could prevent standing armies. Well, that went by the by with World War I, obviously. We've had a standing army ever since. Right. We've also had a lot of history with guns in our westward expansion. Obviously, the so-called peacemaker in the Wild West was important for safety. Right. So there's an awful lot of culture that have come with guns. The Second Amendment is one of the Supreme Court has called it a fundamental right that we have in this country. The way that I look at it as a teacher of constitutional law and as an historian is all of our constitutional rights, whether it's the First Amendment right to free speech, whether it's the right to practice our religion, all of these rights have limitations on them. There's no such thing as an absolute right under our Constitution. For example, I can't sit here on this program and defame you and say untrue things about you and then say, well, it's my First Amendment right to be able to say whatever I want. Right. There are limitations on that right. So when it comes to the Second Amendment, what we're going through now, I believe, is trying to define the limiting principles of the Second Amendment. Where do those rights get limited? Obviously an absolute right would mean that I could carry any weapon at any time that I wanted. you know, a tank, a bazooka, a rocket launcher, you name it. We can't, as a society, allow people to do that. And I don't think very many people would argue that we can. So I think what we're struggling with, and this is the way that the American debate always is. It's messy, it's personal, and it usually sort of settles itself out for some period of time and then rears its head over and over again. This is what makes us a great country, in my opinion, is that we have these healthy debates. And we're not fighting over them, are we? We're talking them out.